Welcome back to Writing the Rapids. I'm your host, Joe Bielecki. This is the show where writers tell me to talk to writers. The show is part conversation podcast, part audio literary magazine, and this month on the show we have A.S. Coomer. You can find everything you need to know about him on his Twitter at @ASCoomer and on his website, ascoomer.com. Specifically, check out Shining the Light. It's one of the best books I've read in quite a while. If you want to support this show, help me buy things like books and pay writers for their time perhaps in the future, maybe even have more frequent episodes, things like that, all your good Patreon-y type things. It's patreon.com/WTR. If you don't want to do that, it's all right. Now let's get into the meat of the show. I think the first thing I want to bring up or start with is I read Shining the Light recently and really liked it. And the thing that I found interesting about it is that it reminded me of sort of like older pieces of literature where it's sort of removed from the protagonist, where like a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, the beginning will be, hey, I found this manuscript somewhere. Or the beginning of Lolita is, I'm this guy's lawyer. It sort of reminded me of that. Where did you get the idea for the format of that book?
Well, I knew I really wanted to write about a musician. I play music, so it's something I'm kind of used to. And I was going through a real big Jason Molina kind of phase at the time. It was more of an obsession than a phase, I guess. And I was reading a whole lot of these music biographies from everybody from like Hank Williams to Robert Johnson. And it always seems like for that level of like authenticity, to make it feel like it was a real music biography, like that's the only format I could really squeeze it into to make it feel real.
Sure. I recently read the Dean Swinford books that are out on Oddle too. So it's interesting the two sort of grand musical book projects out on that press and them being done in different ways. So yeah, talk about that book a little bit for someone who hasn't read it.
Sure. Shining the Light is it's a novel, but it's written like it's a biography on this musician who never existed. His name's Homer and Tumbra, and he's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of people, all into one. And I kind of just wanted to chase the whole mythos of the indie junkie myth and see where it went. And this is the book that came out of it. So I had a lot of fun writing it. I got to write songs for the book, lyrics, all kinds of stuff. It was just a lot of fun to write it.
I like that idea of the mythical artist, be it musician or otherwise. Because you get to play around with the sort of flowery prose of like a music reviewer.
Right.
But also force someone to imagine someone that doesn't exist and music that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I actually had a dream after the first night of reading. It took me a couple sittings to finish the book, but after the first, I had gotten through like the first or second chapter. Like I had a dream about Homer up until like that point in the novel. It was pretty interesting. And then the other book of yours that I've read is The Fetishists, and that is drastically different.
Yeah. I'm kind of like that dog, throw the ball or jingle the keys and I'll chase it. I don't really have a set genre or anything I write about. It's kind of what feels right to write about. But yeah, The Fetishists is a complete departure from Shining the Light.
Yeah, and that was that written first or published first?
Yeah, The Fetishists was first.
Okay.
But I think, if I can remember correctly, my memory these days seems to be failing me, but I'm pretty sure I wrote Shining the Light right after I wrote The Fetishists. Like, I wrote The Fetishists over the course of I think it took me like 28 days or something to get the first draft done, and then I put it off like I usually do with novels. I put it off for a couple months editing and went straight into writing Shining the Light. So it's kind of weird these two books stack up the way they did.
Yeah, that's how I try to do it as well. Where'd you get your start writing? Like, what's your sort of history with this medium?
Yeah, I've been writing since I was real little. Like around about fourth grade or so, my family moved from a neighborhood, kind of suburb type thing, out to the middle of the country, where like the nearest neighbor is like half a mile kind of deal. Um, and I've always been a big reader, so at the time I kind of just went inside myself kind of deal, read a lot, wrote a lot, and that was kind of what you do when you don't have any friends, you know.
Sure. Do you go to school for writing at all?
No, my degree's in social work. I did child abuse and neglect investigations for several years,
Oh,
but
jeez.
yeah. But no, I
Okay.
don't have a degree in writing. I studied creative writing a little bit, but like I didn't have not even a minor in it.
Mm-hmm. Does the social work um, influence you at all?
Yeah, I mean, doing that kind of work, you get to see all aspects of humanity, huh? From the bad to the good. So yeah, I mean it's affected my worldview, which comes out in the writing a lot.
What else? You have some poetry coming out soon, right?
Yeah, I actually just came out a couple weeks ago. It's my first full-length collection. I've had poems published in a lot of different places, but I've never even had a chapbook, you know. So this is really nice for me. It's called Flirting with Disaster and Other Poems. The good dudes over at Alien Buddha Press put it out for me.
I haven't heard of Alien Buddha Press. What's their sort of pedigree?
They usually do like indie outlaw poetry type thing usually.
Okay.
And they also have some anthologies and stuff. And I think they put out a couple novels, but it seems the forte is poetry from
Okay.
indie writers usually.
How's your because I can't like write poetry at all. I've tried. How do you sort of switch between the two different forms of writing?
Well, like with fiction, I set aside time. Like I'm a morning writer. I wake up every day at 7, and whatever long project I'm working on, I can't leave my house or do anything until I get my 2,000 words in it.
Okay.
Um, but with like poetry, it's just kind of like, when like a little play on words or an idea comes to mind, that's when I write it. I usually don't set aside time to write poetry. It's usually an inspiration kind of deal.
Okay. So with fiction, you sort of have the Stephen King method of grind it out, grind it out, grind it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna write a lot and write for a living kind of deal, you got to be your own worst boss, you know? No one else is gonna push you to write whatever you're writing. No one else
Sure.
cares until you make them care, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's very, very true. Are you writing full time now, or is that just an
Yeah.
aspiration? You are?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I'm doing that and music, so
okay.
I'm a broke artist at this point.
What's you have the sort of record label for poets thing I've seen referenced on your website.
Yeah, Lost, Long Gone, Forgotten Records is a real fun project for me. I record one poet, reading usually two of their poems and release it like it's an old school 45. There's an A side and a B side. I record the poets without any instrumentation at first, and then I go in after the fact and add either found sound or weird synthesizers or ambient guitar or whatever I feel like the piece needs, and then I release usually one single every month. But life comes into play. Sometimes it'll be a month or two between releases, but try to stay on top of it.
Oh, the release schedule of this podcast is evidence of that for sure. Where'd you get the idea for that?
When I moved to, I live in Kentucky now, but for the last 4 years I lived in Toledo, Ohio. And when I moved to Toledo, my first year there, I felt like the city was kind of crass and unwelcoming and kind of out of the box at first. I thought it was like Applebee's on every corner and Walmart. But the longer I lived there, I met so many good poets and writers in Toledo, and I had no idea such an underground community of artists was there. And the more uh, I got involved with the poetry scene in Toledo, the more I realized like no one knows who these people are, and that's a damn shame because there's so many good poets that come out of Toledo. So that was kind of my way of wanting to help spread the word and make some new art at the same time.
Sure. Have you ever heard the recordings Steve and Jesse Bernstein did with Sub Pop?
No, I've not.
It's sort of the same thing. It's this he was this poet who had sort of like post Burroughs inspiration, and he recorded an album called Prison, and he wanted it to be sort of like the Johnny Cash album, but it didn't work out that way. And so he's reading his poetry, and then he has music behind it. There's a very long, very brutal poem on that called Face, where he talks about there's always been something wrong with my face. And so I'm always curious to see where people connect to other things that I know about, and oftentimes they don't. Like, it's a lot of parallel thought, it seems, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I've never even heard of that before.
Yeah, he's definitely sort of like a post beat sort of guy, and really that's where my poetry interests. I like the sort of New York, everyone's on heroin sort of poetry, or the like gritty rural realism. B.H. Fairchild is a guy who I read a couple years ago. That's just like cornfields and dust and barns that are breaking down and things like that. So it's January. What do you want to see from the writing world in 2019?
Oh man, that's a solid question. I've been kind of more focused on what I've been doing than what others are doing, and my reading takes me everywhere. I'm usually, all over the place. I don't have a set type of literature I read, and I'm usually couple years removed from what's out now anyway, unless it's fellow friends that I know of having books out. I try to stay up with those. But I mean, in the current political climate, I would love to see some more some subversive literature,
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot too. I was reading an interview with another writer who was talking about like the path of writing he was currently on. He feels like he needs to change it completely because of our president and everything like that. And
yeah,
I've been spending a lot of time sort of looking at the bizarro world from afar and noticing there's a lot of sort of like really blatant sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, I recently rewatched District 9, which is basically an apartheid allegory.
That's the Alien movie, right?
Yeah, it's the one in South Africa, and the guy turns into an alien. And the nature of subversive writing, I'm like questioning. I want something to really tackle what it is that we're dealing with as a country, as a community of people, but also be able to stand the test of time and
right.
not seem preachy or hokey. And like, I guess that's just a tall order. It's like really hard to do.
I tried the Fetishist is my first attempt at sort of dealing with this toxic culture of selfishness. Like that was kind of the whole premise of the book, was to take some very privileged and selfish person and to reverse their situation in kind of like the most bizarre way I could. And I'm getting ready to start a new novel. It's going to be kind of like that as well, as dealing with this sense of entitlement and this lack of concern and empathy for other humans, getting what's yours, what you're owed kind of attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I caught that in the Fetishist as well. I also I like how you have the backdrop of the creepy sex cult, which is something that I can't deny whenever I see it. I really enjoyed Carrie's ritualistic human sacrifice for the same sort of reason.
Me too. I think that's why it was a perfect fit, the Fetishist on Grindhouse.
Oh God, yeah. Those books could be sold as like a pack, as a unit, I think it would really work that way. That's interesting that you talk about how you are focused more on your stuff than sort of like what else is going on in the writing community. And I'm not like I'm definitely not published enough or active enough on social media that I feel like I'm part of any sort of writing community. But I see people talking about the writing community with sort of like a capital TWC.
Mm-hmm.
And like I kind of look for it, and where I find it is not where I expect to find it. And what I find there is not necessarily something that I want to be a part of. Do you
Yeah.
find that for you it's more of like just a laser focus sort of thing, or a you don't really you haven't really found a club that you really want to be a part of?
I mean, I think I have my little say in the writing community at whole for doing stuff like I'm one of the fiction editors for Red Fez, so I read submissions of what people want to publish, and I think I have a little say in that kind of thing, as some sort of gatekeeper, and what having a say of what's published and what's not, who should be published and who's not, kind of deal is always an interesting question. And I always go on the merit of, what's just a good story. I don't really look at anybody's credentials when they send something in. But the whole writing community thing, I feel like it's it's like a group of anything else. I was never really into cliques and that sort of thing. I've always been kind of a loner, so I usually try to focus on what I'm doing as opposed to what other people are doing. Because, I mean, if you're watching other people and still trying to make art, it's going to be somewhat imitative, or it's going to be standoffish. It's not going to usually be a complete work in itself if you're always watching over your shoulder and what other people are doing.
I'm on the Red Fez website now. I must have overlooked that when I was researching you. One of the things you're talking about, your reading kind of takes you everywhere. I was looking at your Goodreads
Oh, yeah.
with my wife, because she and I read very, very different things. And I was like, oh man, for writing The Fetishists, he reads a lot more books kind of like what you read. You gave a pretty high review to I'll Be Gone in the Night is what it's called, about the Golden
Yeah.
State Killer.
Yeah. For like, she didn't finish it, but she died when she was still writing it.
Yeah.
For an unfinished book picked up by an associate and an editor to finish, I thought it was really well done. And like, she has such a humanizing way of dealing with crime fiction. Usually with crime fiction, it's all about the killer and that kind of thing, and she kind of like helps to bring a face to like victims, and it was a good read.
Yeah, that's kind of what she was saying too, is the way that she explores it is definitely not super glorifying or anything. Like, a lot of, like, she was into true crime for like a really long time, and like really heavy into it. Like, that's what she would watch, that's what she would read, those were the podcasts that she was listening to, and like really burnt out on it after about a year. Like, crashed hard
Yeah.
on it. And
It's easy to do.
I feel like I'm waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with her, because true
It's kind of a
crime.
weird thing, isn't it? Like, all the Netflix specials now are about, true crime. Did the murderer do it? Who did? And then
Yeah,
it's kind of funny.
I wonder if it's a symptom also of our hunger for like real investigative journalism,
Yeah, it might be.
where it's, I guess that's the perfect topic, because it's something that's controversial that not a lot of people agree on, but the information is out there,
Yeah.
and you're far enough removed from it that, with the exception of like Serial or Making a Murderer, there's, not necessarily people's lives hanging in the balance anymore. And you can really see sort of the process of gathering and synthesizing information in a way that both tells a story and teaches you something, which is something that the current news format just doesn't give us time for.
That, and the whole looking into the psyche of a human that's so far removed from empathy is always an interesting thing too. I think that, to be able to kill somebody is not something normal people can fathom, I think, for the most part. And so to, like, to kind of dive into that whole different mindset is always kind of captivating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember reading a a blog post by a Buddhist master monk guy after one of the school shootings. It was a couple of years ago. It might have been the one that Alex Jones always says is a false flag, or is like famous.
Sandy Hook?
That's the one, Sandy Hook. And he was talking about the sort of like non-duality that humans have in Zen Buddhism, and that like you definitely could be on either side of this tragedy. Like you have the capability of being on either side of that tragedy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily what people are trying to get at with true crime, but it's another interesting thing to consider for sure, I think. I'm at this point now, personally. So this is maybe a selfish question, but I'm at this point personally where I'm kind of done for a while submitting short stuff around, and I have several novels that are just about ready to go out. But this idea of like submitting long stuff, and you said that you wrote what was it, The Fetishist in 28 days?
Yeah.
So I mean that's less than a NaNoWriMo. Do you find that there's a different sort of weight or anxiety to submitting book length works rather than like individual stories or individual poems?
Yeah, short fiction stuff. Yeah, I've kind of like stopped submitting a lot of stuff too, and I don't write short fiction as much anymore. I just don't get the same joy out of making a short story as I do with something long. I think there's something, going back to the whole Buddhist thing, there's something Zen-like about like the patience involved with making something over, 40,000, 50,000 words. Like, you get to play with a lot more things, themes you get to intertwine into stuff, images. I kind of like to think of like a novel, almost like a song. Like, you have like these different choruses you try to sneak in at different parts of the thing. But the whole submitting process sucks, man. Like, I hate it. I wish I'm at the point now to where I wish I had an agent or a long-term relationship with a single publisher so I could devote more time to just making the stuff as opposed to trying to sell it. I've never been a salesman. I'm not good usually at talking about stuff that I do. I'm much better at writing, sitting down, hammering it out. I can have a more clear focus. But the submission process is a nightmare.
Okay, well, that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
Like this definitely isn't a show about like the tips and tricks of how to do it, but I do like the commiseration of people just saying yes, it's bad. It's not a fun part of the work.
And it seems like I hate to say it, but most of it's a big club thing too. It's all about who you know, and
Sure.
lot of places won't even read your stuff unless you have an agent or a fellow writer that's been published by them that will recommend you to them, kind of deal, which is unfortunate for literature as a whole. I mean, so many good writers have never been published before, but they may be sitting on one of the best novels everyone should read, but it'll never be read until they network or whatever the fancy term would be.
I mean, that's also a bad way to build a friendship, is to go DM somebody on Twitter that you have like a very passing relationship with and be like, hey, will you please read my book so you can tell your publisher friend about it, maybe, if they ask you about my writing.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
And that's probably how you get all the drama in these sort of artistic communities, is that it's a very like using culture of
all these relationships about what can I get from you as opposed to what does this relationship actually mean.
Do you feel like music's like that too?
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. Yeah, it's unfortunate that's the way it is with when you make art a business. Like, I know everybody's got to eat and all that, but sometimes it should just be about whatever the art is, and it seems like so often it's not. It's always about the other bullshit around the art.
And then there's the whole thing about agents where I remember it was the Tyrant Books guy. It must have been a while ago now, and I think I've brought it up on the podcast before, but was like, I'm not going to publish anybody who has an agent. Like, I don't like agents. I don't trust agents.
Right.
So it's like a whole another cog in this machine that's already weird.
I mean, they're kind of middlemen, if you think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like they just have connections. So unfortunately, you got to go through them. And I've never worked with an agent, so I mean, I can't really say what the experience would be like, and I'm sure they have their pros and cons, but it is kind of a weird thing that you have to go through this middle person to have the publisher see your work.
Yeah, it's weird. It reminds me of the idea of like accrediting universities. And I've been thinking about that a lot being out of college for a few years, really wanting to continue my education somehow but not trusting like anything anymore. And so I like find lectures on YouTube and I watch them and I think, okay,
Yep.
but like who is this person? Yes, it looks like they're lecturing from a classroom, but like who is this and who is telling me that they're okay and who are those people and
Yeah.
everything, and it gets dizzying and tiring.
Yeah.
But I guess that's part of it. I mean, thank God for Patreon. I mean, you can always just at some point, drop out of the whole system and just let the fans come to you. But at some point, you need
Yeah.
to get the fans to come to you somehow.
Yeah. The gatekeepers of, you know, who is known and who is not, all that.
Yeah, I mean, even like just trusting like a YouTube algorithm or something is tricky
Yeah.
these days anyway. Because I mean, you could do that. You could self-publish your book and then you could have a video of you reading it or something and have some sort of, I don't know, like a cat in the video that you're petting, so people are there for to like watch you pet a cat while you're reading, while you have the
Yeah.
audiobook going or something.
Well, there's like that whole phenomenon of Instagram poets,
Oh God.
that
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Which I mean, I'm all for art, making it, even if I don't particularly care for what you're doing. But it
Mhm.
seems like a lot of the whole Instagram poetry community is, man, it's just not something I can really get behind.
No, I don't like it either. And I don't seek it out. For some reason, a copy of Milk and Honey ended up in our household, and I read it. And like as I was reading, I was like, oh yeah, these are like sad things, and I can understand the emotion here. And like immediately after reading it, the only thing I have to think about it is like not the poems themselves or how they made me feel, things that poetry's supposed to do
Hmm.
generally. And it was more just like, huh, when I go to Barnes and Noble, I see a lot of poetry books in the poetry section that have cover art like this and are written by somebody who has like a cryptic lowercase author name,
Yeah.
and the rest of the poetry section is just collections of E. E. Cummings and stuff like that. Like I can't find poetry that I would want to read in a bookstore.
Yeah, the poetry community that I pay attention most are these outlaw poets, as they say, or indie small people. I don't think you're gonna find a copy of, you know, Michael Grover or Bob Phillips in Barnes and Noble, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
And I wonder why that is. Like, why does that have to be like that? Um, I don't know what the gatekeeping to like have your book sold in Barnes and Noble even is, but I wonder if
I'm
it's
sure.
just like the infrastructure just isn't there for a smaller press like that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a, New York distribution thing,
Mm-hmm.
You're not a part of the Big Five or whatever. You're not gonna get read.
I mean, that's the other thing. We were talking earlier about reading everywhere and being a couple years behind. I have this like darn near crippling anxiety about not being well read enough all
Yeah.
the time,
I
especially
think
since starting the show.
I think that's a writer thing. Uh, writing is one of those solitary pursuits that you do alone, but then you share. It's one voice amongst many, and there's so many books out there that I want to read too. So I feel the same way. And there's so many books you're supposed to read too.
Oh god, yeah.
what people want you to read, what you're supposed to have read, and I don't know. I
Yeah.
used to really try to knock out X amount of classics a year,
Mm.
um, but it's all bullshit. It's really about following what you want to read and what you want to see as yourself as a writer. Like, who do you fit in with? Who do you not fit in with? What do you think will change you? Kind of deal. That's the way I approach books now.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it for sure. Part of it is just the time investment. And this is
Yeah.
the thing I know I've talked about too. Like, it takes me so long to read a book, whereas I can watch a movie by a director that I feel like I should watch. And
Right.
I force myself to sit down for 2 hours. And even if I hate it, it's only 2 hours.
Yep.
Or, I say now that I'm far enough removed from it, it's like, what is this whole emo music thing about? And then I sit down and I listen to it for an hour or two, and it's like, okay, I get it. Good.
Yeah.
But writing is so much harder.
It is. And I'm all for a well-rounded diet of books. I think the whole telling people what they should and shouldn't read is kind of a bummer. But then again, like, I mean, you can live as many lives as books as you can read, like that's part of it. So you wanna just get out of your own circle of books too. So I like reading stuff you normally wouldn't as well. But there's so many books, it's impossible,
Yeah, it's just too many. People should stop writing, and so I can read all the rest of the books.
Yeah, we should be the only two writers left.
I agree, 100%. It'd be a lot easier to make money than that way too.
Yeah.
What are some of the things? What's your editing process like? How about that? I'm curious about that. I know you said you put a project away for a couple months.
Yeah. I usually give myself like at least 2 months of space in between first draft being finished and my first read through. And in that time, I do other stuff. I either do short fiction or another long project or whatever. But when I go back to my first read through, I try to read the novel as quickly as possible in one sitting if I can. But lately, I've been writing longer. Like, I've been getting up to 79, 85,000 words in that ballpark. So one sitting is usually not possible. But I try to read through the novel quickly, just going for story. Making sure the story makes sense, if it attaches to me, like if I'm even interested anymore. And then the second read through, I start breaking down more along the lines of the mechanics of the story, whether or not it makes sense, and really kind of paying attention to spots where my attention waned. And then the third read through, that's when I'm starting to worry about like the line for line, whether or not polishing each sentence, adding, deleting, whatever. And by the fourth read through, it's like a polishing thing, and then I'm starting to gear up to who would even read this? Like, where should I send this? Kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. Do you have? This is another thing I've seen sort of like hotly debated. Do you have like a list of publishers, or do you read? I'm trying to structure the question correctly. Publishers say, please be familiar with our work before submitting. How
Right.
often do you think that is true for you? Or do
For
you not
me,
want to self-incriminate?
I try to send like when I first started the whole submission thing, it was totally the shotgun approach. I didn't know any of these people, and I was just shotgunning query letters and manuscript attachments to anybody who was reading,
Mm-hmm.
And but now I'm much more selective. It's more about like who would you want to associate with, who would you like to work with, kind of deal is the way I approach it now. So I'm much more leery about sending a book to somebody I haven't worked with before or I don't know of, like I'm not familiar with their work. But yeah, those first couple days, man, I was, you get a novel finished, it's your first one, you're sending out, I'm shotgunning it, sending it to everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the approach these days.
Yeah, I like the being selective for you rather than for them mindset.
Yeah.
That's not something I've considered, and I like that idea that like I don't want particularly this place to have my work, or You know,
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy these people, and I want to work with them.
And it's not so much a snooty thing. I mean, it might have come out as a snooty thing, but it's more along the lines of like, this is your baby, this is your blood, sweat, and tears. And do you really want to be represented next to these people with what you've done? It's kind of that thing. And it's a limiting thing for sure, but at the same time, it's kind of like you don't want to get into a relationship that you can't be proud of.
I agree, especially in the world of indie publishing, where the amount of copies you might be selling isn't gonna be super high, right?
Yeah.
So like, who are the people that I want to reach with this piece?
Yeah.
Who are the type of people I want reading me and talking about me and
Yeah.
things like that? So I get it. I understand. This is a very specific and perhaps strange question, but you have a tattoo on your right forearm of like a girl with a wolf head. Who did that? Because I think I might follow them on Instagram.
Robert Ryan from New York did it.
Okay.
He's an amazing tattoo artist, and he travels a lot, so he may be in your area tattooing sometime.
Okay. What's your philosophy on tattoos? I don't have any, but the reason I got Instagram was to follow tattoo artists.
Yeah. I used to work at a tattoo shop, being the floor guy, the paperwork processor guy at my friend's tattoo shop in Bowling Green, Kentucky, called Carter's Tattoo. I've always loved tattoos. I remember my mom's telling me when I was real little, I saw a biker. I can't remember how old I was, but he had long hair, this crazy beard, covered in tattoos, and he got off a motorcycle. And I was like, Mom, that's me one day. For one reason or another, that's been something I've been trying to be about. And I've always loved tattoos. There's something beautiful about the dedication to reserving a part of you for one piece of art. Like that's gonna be there.
Absolutely.
But my process of getting tattoos is all different. Like people always ask me, what's the story? What's the story? I'm like, they're all different. I've got a bunch, and I don't know how many in particular, but they're all different. They all have reasons.
Yeah, I wish I could connect that to writing somehow in like a really meaningful way. I feel like
yeah.
that would tie it really well. Like, yeah, that's like writing a book.
Yeah, I got a tattoo of Kurt Vonnegut, so there you go.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it tied it back to writing that way.
Vonnegut's one of those guys I haven't read. I have one of his books. I bought it when it was on sale one time, and I haven't gotten around to reading it yet.
Man, I love Vonnegut. Read Cat's Cradle when you get a chance. It's one of my favorite books.
Definitely. What is your favorite book?
Okay. It changes every day.
Sure.
I think today it might be the Outlaw Bible of American Poetry. Been reading that sucker, and it's a beast of a book, but it's got everybody in there, man. From D.A. Levy to Patti Smith, like this Amiri Baraka, like everybody's in there. It's just such a interesting anthology.
I'll have to check that one out as well. It's got good reviews.
Yeah, it's real good. And you can find used copies pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm. Are you more of a used book person or a new book person?
Well, right now I'm a order online person because I moved to kind of rural Kentucky where there's not an indie bookstore. I used to work at an indie bookstore up in Perrysburg, Ohio, called Gathering Volumes, and that's, I would support brand new books from that place just because independent bookstores are, like the holy grail for me.
Yeah.
But used bookstores are nice too. It's just I don't really have any in my area right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we live in a place that has like a couple, and then there's a lot of thrift stores around here, and it's always interesting to see what you find used at a thrift store in terms of books. I found like a coffee table encyclopedia of science fiction writing from the 70s.
Oh, man.
And it had color pictures and everything, so I bought it, and I went and looked it up, and it has just awful reviews, and I'm so excited to like dig into it someday. All the reviews were like, Yeah, he took on this big task and did not have the manpower to do it.
Bummer.
But I mean, I bought it for the pictures because
Yeah, for
70s
sure.
science fiction art is awesome.
Yeah, yeah. We got. I think there's like a Books a Million in Owensboro, which is the biggest city I live next to, and I mean, I'll buy a book from there if I need to, but I would just rather not.
Hmm. There's the whole wow, I haven't heard of Books a Million. Is that its
It's like
headquarters is in Alabama.
okay.
So,
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like the Kmart version of Barnes and Noble is the way I kind of like to think of it.
mm, okay. Yeah, I gotcha. I guess that probably hasn't made its way to the Midwest in any sort of deep penetrating way. I mean, Barnes and Noble out here just smothered everything out. Uh,
Yeah.
there's not like the bookstores you go to. There's a Schuler Books, which I think is just for Michigan. I think they just have like 2 locations anymore. They used to have 3, and then like the strip mall that they were in raised their lease for 1 year by like 300% or something crazy. It was
Ouch.
it's like we sell books. What are you doing?
Right?
We can't afford this. I mean, I like all the music, all the physical music I've ever bought. I think I bought at a bookstore too. So,
Yeah.
bookstores, brick and mortar stores, have like a really special place
Man,
in
there's
my
this.
heart.
I don't know if you ever get a chance to go to Columbus, Ohio, but I played a show at this really cool place not too long ago called Cafe Kerouac, and it's a bar slash bookstore slash venue. You know, indie like an independent place. It's just wonderful. I wish more places like that would pop up.
Yeah, that seems really cool. I like that a lot. I have this wild hair because in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I live, there's a lot of storefronts that are cheap right now, and working for other people sucks.
Yeah.
So like I have this wild hair and dream like, man, if I could get like 1 or 2 investors, I could open a place.
Yeah.
I had the idea to open a donut bakery slash poetry place and call it Slam Dunks. But yeah, that's interesting. Coffee house and bar and records and books and
Yep.
venue.
Yeah, it's real cool. It's over near Ohio State University, so they've got that whole big university there, so the clientele is pretty good. But I mean, if this places like that, like when you stumble upon them, you got to like spread the word because I think that's like the unicorn of places that I want to be associated with, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I have my older brother went to University of Michigan, and my little sister goes to Michigan State. So I don't think I can be within 50 miles of OSU
Oh, well,
without
see,
getting in trouble.
I'm from Kentucky, so it's
Yeah,
kind
you
of
don't
like
care.
Ohio State is just like, oh man, no one wants to talk about them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I get it too. But it's a cool spot, and they're not really for like the chads of the place.
Yeah.
There's not really the pink polo crowd there, so I feel safe talking about it.
Yeah. It seem. I wonder if that's why they have this family tab on their website that is just photos of the place and people in it. That's interesting. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's just serendipitous that I saw that right when you were talking about it, but it's interesting. I kind of want to talk about Shining the Light more. I really like that book.
Oh, well,
Um, because you talked about um oh, what was his name? You mentioned it, Jason Molina.
hmm
I think one of the songs by Songs Oh Hi is on my 2019 playlist that I started.
yeah,
Um, the the story of Homer is pretty it's at once fantastical and sort of predictable, I guess. Him as a character, he's got that enigmatic thing that I think is turned up to 11 more than any singer-songwriter that I'm familiar with. I'm not
yeah,
a huge singer-songwriter type of dude, but um, the sort of people that he associates with that I think ultimately leads to his downfall is fairly predictable. It kind of feels like a Tom Waits song
Yeah,
drawn out
I
to
love
book
Tom
form.
Waits. Yeah, you know, it's life in the indie music scene kind of deal. Like I've seen it, I know about it. There are certain things that are predictable, but at the same time, there's that level of unpredictableness when you're making art for a living. You know, you are going to associate with interesting and diverse people when you're making art, and the whole music thing, you know, it lends itself quite easily to the enigmatic kind of thing, the keeping yourself a little bit removed, a little bit of mystery.
I also have always sort of wanted to play the character of Homer. One of the things I think that really kept me engaged with the book is how much, as like a kid, minus the drinking and Xanax addiction, like I wanted to be that guy that just like was quiet and focused and made things that like basically made up for the antisocial behaviors, you know?
Yeah, yeah, he's a real relatable character for me. And it probably comes out a lot in the book. You know, I would much rather be making something than just hanging out kind of deal. Uh, and you know, it's fun to trace other lives you could have lived too. I think that's a big part of probably why we write. You know, we get to live in somebody else's head for a little bit.
Yeah, to chase those paths that your rational mind knows, well, this might not lead to such a good place.
Yeah. One of these days, I would like to sit down with some of my musician friends and actually make some of those songs happen that are in the book. I've I've got a kind of a skeletal bone structure for some of them, but most of them are just lyrics. But it'd be real fun to chase it down and actually make some of these records.
I would, yeah, that's one of the things that whenever I read fictionalized music people, I always want someone to go and make that music.
Yeah,
Um, but I guess it's kind of frightening too, since you know, the narrator sets up such a grandiose expectation of what I'm going to hear.
yeah.
But I guess that's
Yeah.
the fun of it too.
It's kind of like the whole translation of books to movies. You know, everybody wants their favorite books to be a movie, but then when the movie comes out, inevitably it's a letdown. You know.
Mm-hmm. When I was a small child, my dad used to read to my brother and I before bedtime, and he would read the fantasy novels that he read when he was in high school or whatever, and so he would skip all the gory parts or whatever. But
Yeah.
he read this one series, he read the Shannara series by Terry Brooks to us. And I remember as a kid, this was right around the time I was in elementary school and the Harry Potter movies just started happening. And I had like read the Harry Potter books because I was alive. And I remember thinking, oh man, I want the Shannara series to be a movie. Like, I want that so bad. I want to see this world. And then years later, like, MTV put out a TV show of that
Oh no.
series. And I'm like, oh, I can't. Like, one of the main characters was a kid who was in Glee. And I was just like, oh, I can't watch this.
It's kind
Like,
of
there's no way.
like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. Did you ever read those?
I didn't know. I never got around to those.
They're actually killer. But you know, they've I think have started and stopped filming like 8,000 times. But like it's kind of the same thing. Like I want it to happen, but at the same time, like you know, it's gonna be a big old disaster.
Mm-hmm. God, interestingly enough, I met a guy once. I worked at a nonprofit with this guy who met his wife on a Wheel of Time fan forum.
Yes.
So that is the connection there. I also remember one of the things I really liked about Shining the Light is that he does a long string of concept albums that are all part of one story. Because my like second most favorite band ever in the timeline of my life is Coheed and Cambria, which
Yeah.
I mean their whole shtick is it's a concept. I remember being on fan forums back in the day when there were like rumors of movies, and
Yeah.
that feeling of like, oh my god, it'd be so
I know
great.
the comics happened, right? I never read
Yeah,
them.
the comics are being printed now, um, and I think a movie will never happen. At some point, the rumors got so big that the band had to address it and calm everyone down because people were freaking out. And he's like, yeah, maybe once we get all the comics done.
Yeah.
And they're still making albums as part of the story. So I don't think that that's ever going to happen. But yeah, they have a comic run going on right now that looks interesting. And I just haven't been able to find it in a format that I like.
Yeah.
I don't like the singular issues when it comes to comic books. And the only like trade that they have is hardcover. And I don't want a hardcover comic book either.
Yeah.
I'm really weird about book formats like that. There's a couple fantasy book series that I get, like the collector's edition where it's like 3 books in one big binding. And then
Yeah.
there's one in particular they stopped doing that, and that's when I stopped reading the series because I like didn't want on my bookshelf the format of the books to change.
Yeah.
Um is that do you have a space in your living area for books that you sort of arrange in a specific way, or is it more haphazard?
Oh man. Yeah. If my wife listens to this, she will be cracking up right now. Um, I used to have some real strong OCD tendencies.
Okay.
Um, like my record collection, right, was at a time it was alphabetized by record label and then by the band, like, you know.
Mm.
But the books right now, she's allowed me to just do alphabetical because she, for the longest time, she would just walk by and just take 1 or 2 books and just file them wrong on purpose just to watch me react to it because I've got such like a, you know, they got to be right kind of thing. And she's slowly worked me out of this that whole super filing system. But now they're just now they're all genres all together, but just by author title. But yeah, we've got a big old library. It's real nice.
Good.
I like to say they're my friends. Like when we were moving, my family was pissed because they had all these heavy boxes. Like, what's in here? Like my friends, like all my books, like, you know.
Yeah, I think when we moved out of our apartment into our first house where we're living now, I don't think I even let anybody carry the books. I think I put them all in my car like beforehand. I was like, all right, it's time. And yeah, like we have a bedroom that is the library and it's just books all around, and we bought rocking chairs specifically for those rooms.
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying at the apartment. I was trying to like figure out how to organize the books. I didn't want to do alphabetical, and so I was like arranging them sort of by like narrative theme or
Okay.
by size.
Yeah.
I've never been. I don't particularly like the aesthetic of sorting them by color that some people
Yeah.
do. I see
I've
that
had
on
friends
YouTube
that
a
done
lot.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing I've noticed now that I have them alphabetized by author is the weird connections that you make by having such a varied reading experience and
Yep.
and sharing it with a significant other, where
Yep.
I'll have like The Hobbit is next to something else that's like a young adult coming of age story that's next to some sort of philosophy book, but for some reason the spines of all 3 of them are green. So when you look
Yeah.
at the bookshelf, they are all together, and you make weird sort of connections. Like it's a strange pastiche. It's like Pee-wee's Playhouse or something, where it's like I'm
Yeah.
putting all of these strange things next to each other and calling them equal and seeing what happens.
Yeah. Bookshelves are fun. That's the first thing I gravitate to in new places. Like if you know you're invited over to a dinner party or something, like you'll always find me creeping on somebody's bookshelf and seeing what kind of associations I can make.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a friend whose older brother collected video games, and he kept them all on bookshelves. And like every time I was at their house, all I would do for the first like 5 minutes is just like look at their bookshelf. And
Yeah.
as we were sitting around talking, hanging out, or watching a movie, whatever, my head would always gravitate and just like stare at the bookshelf. It's a strange thing. The bookshelf as like interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's almost, it's funny. Like I don't tend to get rid of books. If I buy a book, even if I hated it, like it's going on the shelf, kind of thing. So it's interesting to think about what people think of you based on what's on your shelf,
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I've got some interesting books on there that, I wouldn't like to say that's representative of who I am or what I read, but I mean, I definitely read it.
Yeah, the Atlas Shrugged. It's like I had to read it. I had to
Yeah,
know what I was hating.
yeah, I had that on my shelf too, and I hated that book, man. But I loved The Fountainhead,
Okay.
So it's kind of like it's on there. I got Anthem too, and it was okay.
Okay. I haven't actually read any of that. My wife's dad the is a big wig in the Michigan Libertarian Party, so he has like all of her works on his bookshelf.
Yeah.
Um, and my brother started reading Atlas Shrugged when he started college, and he's like, I didn't like that. So like, I think he even got rid of his copy. But similarly to you, I don't get rid of books. The only books that we got rid of when we moved in together were books that we had multiple copies of because we both had to read them in school.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, who has the best looking copy of East of Eden, and we're gonna get rid of the old one.
Yeah.
My excuse for that is for my children, my future children, when we have kids. I want them to have as many books available to them as possible so that they can value reading and have a wide experience without having to spend lots of money.
Yeah, you got to keep them, especially before Trump starts burning them.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. I will give you the last word here before we move on to you reading your stuff. Like, do you have any sort of calls to action at this time you would like to put out there?
Oh, calls to action.
Mm-hmm.
Read more, and read everything. Don't just read old white guys, And if you're interested in stuff that I do, I'd appreciate if, you like poetry, go to lostlongonforgottenrecords.wordpress.com, listen to some of those. Or if you like small press books, I'm also one of the editors of Cocklebur Press. We've released Michelle McDonald's first book on our press called Point of Departure, and we're getting ready to release Bob Phillips' Seasons Whirling Like a Clock soon. So that's a place for independent, great voices in books. I've got a couple short story collections coming out and a new novel soon. So if anybody's interested in that, you can always stay up to date with me at ascoomer.com. This first poem is the title piece for the book. It's called Flirting with Disaster. It was originally published by my friend Juliet Cook. She has this excellent literary site called 13 Minor Birds. It was republished in the song Is, and it's going to be anthologized in this collection called This Is Poetry for Poets of the South. It's kind of it's a poem and song almost, and I'll read it. It's called Flirting with Disaster. My mother lost everything she owned twice in house fires. She smokes like a goddamn chimney. Always has. I guess we all flirt with disaster in our own terms. I tend to spend too much time alone. I'm not good on my own. You see, I get these itchy fingers and bad ideas. I got this circling mind and backload upon backload of misplaced time, and it all makes me cringe. I guess we all flirt with disaster in our own terms. I know people with fixations. Addictions come in many shapes and sizes. It's not all brown bottles and little plastic baggies. They tend to bumper car through life, shielded, however scantily, by ideology, belief, substance, or everyday wishful thinking, leaving a little tread here, a little rubber bumper there, until they're skating, as the old proverb goes, on thin ice. I guess we all flirt with disaster in our own terms. And isn't this sounding like a song? Something loud, bluesy, abrasive, sweating right along with the cheap domestic light beer on top of the rattling busted amp. I'd make it one if I could play lead, but I've always been out here, on the offbeat, in a jerk and sway rhythm section no one wants to listen to anyway. Sing it, brother. Yeah, all right. Just not tonight, okay? The next poem I want to read is Antumbra. It's actually written and dedicated to Homer and Tumbra, the protagonist of Shining the Light. Let me flip to it here. Antumbra for Homer. What if, when you go, you have to sit through a PowerPoint of your life? A year in review kind of thing. The lows, the highs if you were so lucky, but mostly just the in-betweens. Slide after slide of indecision, of stagnation, of little flickers of yourself with a finger in your nose. Waiting, watching, snoring, passive. You'll start to wonder if the sun ever really did shine. Can you recall actually feeling the concussions of all those summer thunderstorms? What was it like to feel the spring grass between your barefooted toes? The bright December sky, cloudless and brilliant, becomes an abstraction. On March 22nd, 2012, the greatest friend I never met died. I didn't know him then. Well, not completely. See, I created him, curated from bits and pieces, spit, liquor, rusted out guitar strings, little blue pills, bubblegum, and duct tape. He was all fragments, really. Named him after light and shadows, an occluded body appearing shrouded in light, a less than ship-shape image of the wanderer, the seeker, the seer. And what does any of that mean? Should it go ahead and come with a grain of salt? Will it be on the PowerPoint as a footnote you really have to squint to even make out? And will any of this be on the final? Or is it just cumulative? God, I hope there's a curve. The next poem I want to read is from my good friend Michael Grover, who Cockleburr Press will also be putting out a book of poems by probably next year or later on this year. He's a really great poet, but he's got cancer and he's fighting that right now. So I wrote him a poem. It's called "The Straightening of the Path." Sometimes the songs come in backwards. The radio cinched into the old car battery got it wrong, maybe. The towers, shooting out their noise, ones and zeros or bits and pieces, got crossed with some other invisibility, perhaps. I don't know. Little snatches of the way things are, then how they're coming in, at odds with the way I breathe. The way the air formulates into crystals in my mind, shrouding my lungs in a cave of ice. Stalactites and stalagmites of purpose. The machinery in motion, but with a timetable strictly adhered to. My friend got some bad news, meaning I too got some bad news. The tunnel system is working against us, his especially. It's burrowing, it's twisting and turning through the nows and thens and whens is straightening. It's decided to take a more direct route. And this hurts. Sure, like hell it hurts, but, and maybe only just but, will the tunnel straighten enough for him to see, to really see. Not this haphazard thing we struggle to complete each day, upside down and backwards, faulty at best. Maybe the straightening of the path will give him a glimpse of the light, if there is a light. Maybe there will be something there, not your imaginary reflection, a friend waiting with hand outstretched, an understanding, a peace. Or maybe just the mind-clearing breath of unobstructed Turanian air. The sun, the actual light of being, unmitigated and free. I hope he keeps his eyes open. That was published by Blottercher back in Volume 3, Issue 1. It's a cool literary site y'all should check out. The last poem I'll read is it's called "I'm Not Sure How I Feel About the Sound." It was originally published by The Song Is, and it won the Thelma Prize in 2016, 2017, which was judged by Catfish McDarris. I'm not sure how I feel about the sound. Can't no one love you better than I did? All these years, all those nights bright with fulfilled longing, captured desire and twisted sheets, to the teeth with a big, fat love, bursting at the seams, dripping with it, Slicker than any backcountry road post-summer downpour, juicier than any peach you've tasted. Now it's just a picture of the thing. The train whistle's blowing right by our house, what used to be our house. It used to make you snuggle closer, something so lonesome in the cry, I guess. Well, I was just glad it was crying. Seemed like somebody somewhere had to be. That's what my grandmother always said. And the result? Now that you're gone, even the coffee pot don't look right. Sitting cockeyed on the counter, beached by grains of staled, clumpy sugar and sticky spots where I spilled the milk. Baby, I don't even know why I bother to pay the electric bill. I keep all the lights off now that you're gone. Don't see the point in seeing the spaces where you ain't, 'cause baby, you ain't. And I remember sitting in that back room down at the bar, swaying to the slide guitar and the gentle finger picking, putting them away with you. Baby, we could really put them away, couldn't we? And with an arm draped around your shoulders, I swore I would never write a song like that. I swore I would never write a song like this. The troubadour up there telling the story, his story. One you've heard 100 times if you've heard it once. But hearing him, you knew it true all the same, and you couldn't help but move along. Just some unaware passenger, picked up and carried off by the flash flood, the rising waters of it all. Each of us dripping, swimming in our own way, because either you swim or you drown. And we laughed. Sure, we knew I'd never write a song like that, a song like this, because I wouldn't have to, because you would always be here, because we would always be together. Hear that? Trains coming on down the line, and for the first time in my life, I'm not sure how I feel about the sound.